Start here. I now come to the second part of Ethics 2 Rebooted, which is Doctors Inside Borders. So I want you to connect the discussion about the human terrain teams and the human terrain system, which is enormously more complex than this is just a little tiny introduction. I just want you to know they're there. With what happens when we deal with doctors who are in the same sorts of situations. So this is the territory that we've been in when we looked at the situation that nurses and doctors faced in Vietnam. And remember that Michael Hare's experience of meeting the doctor who says, he says, well, you took the Hippocratic Oath, right? And he's like, I took it in America. So, okay. So here we face a much deeper and darker issue, which is hard to imagine. I mean, it's hard to imagine after you look at all the Vietnam War stuff, it's hard to imagine it getting darker than that, but this is darker. Again, it's an initiative that was started by the military, which soon engulfed civilians. And in 2002, the Bush White House, which was civilian, right, became interested in getting information from people it was picking up in Afghanistan, and that it would eventually begin picking up in Iraq about a year later. And this is the beginning, as far as we know, of the creation of detainees. Okay, so these detainees, and please see, I'm not going to do this every time because this is going to be tedious, but you have to see these scare quotes that I'm doing around detainees, because a detainee, there is really no such thing. This is something which the Bush White House created. If you pick somebody up on a battlefield, they're a prisoner of war. The end. There is no such thing as a detainee who was not a prisoner of war. But that's what the Bush White House argued. So the administration's word, which is detainee, is not mine. I don't agree with it at all. The political implications of it are very bad indeed. And I believe these people who were detainees, prisoners of war, were in fact, and should have had accorded to them, the rights of the Geneva Conventions and the protocols of the Geneva Conventions. If you pick somebody up on the battlefield, they are a prisoner of war. If you don't let them go, you can ask them questions and then say, okay, well, thank you for your service. Thanks for coming in. You're free to go. In other words, treat them like civilians because they're civilians. If you think they're not civilians, take them in if you wish. I mean, this is legal if you're at a legal war, which they were not, because there was. Okay, the UN did pass a resolution against Iraq, but it was because Colin Powell went and lied about having anthrax and weapons of mass destruction. Whatever. Poor Colin Powell. Boo-hoo-hoo. So, as far as I'm concerned, when you take those people in and you put them in camps, which has barbed wire around it, and you don't let them out, or you put them in Abu Ghraib, the hard site, which I showed you pictures of, the prison, they have become prisoners. They are prisoners of war. That is the definition of a prisoner of war. Somebody you won't let go because you suspect that they are a combatant. Oh, a prisoner of war. But no, said the Bush White House, they're detainees. And if they're detainees and you can't call them prisoners of war, you don't refuse to call them prisoners of war, then you can do whatever you like to them. That's the Bush argument. Okay, but what you do is you hand them over to the military and say, just keep these people for us, will you? And they're like, for how long? It's like, just keep them. Oh, okay. And so people stayed, were imprisoned sometimes for years, sometimes for 10 years, without being charged with any particular crime. And then they were let go. And their families came to the gates of Abu Ghraib every day to see who would be let go today. Some people were in for a year. They were let go without any mention. They were just like kicked out. They were like, okay, you're out. And other people were kept for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, with no charges, no access to lawyers, none of that stuff. They weren't doing any of that. They were prisoners of war, apparently. So the detainees were then taken to various prisons, hidden prisons, that were in Iraq, but also elsewhere. And one of the places they were taken to, well, they were taken to Abu Ghraib, which we'll talk about. They were taken to Guantanamo, and remember I showed you a little map. I'll show it to you again. And this is the naval base in Cuba. which is still the United States. This is a little tiny area, basically, of part of Cuba, which is the United States. They've held on to this piece of ground. They're prepared to fight Cuba for it. Okay, whatever. So everybody's like, okay, fine, have it. But the thing about Guantanamo and the prison that's there, and Camp X-Ray, which I mentioned, the Kristen Stewart film, Camp X-Ray, which made, what, $8,000, remember? It's a big, heavy hitter there, probably made everybody wealthy. That Camp X-Ray is in Guantanamo. And this is a hard site that actually, it started off as a bunch of tents and sort of prefab buildings. And then they actually built a hard site, and they actually got people, they built a prison, and they put people in this prison. Bars, the secure doors, the whole, it's a massive, it looks like a Supermax prison. Okay, so you might wind up there in Guantanamo, which is got shortened to Gitmo because people got tired of saying Guantanamo, so it's typical sort of American. They shortened it to Gitmo. And then they started talking about Gitmoizing things, because Gitmoizing things meant you took a place that was sort of somewhere in gray territory. Like, so you might, let's say you've got a friendship with a country in Africa. So you might build a prison. You say, just give us a little piece of land here. We want to build a prison. Here's some money for your next election. And the government says, oh, okay, fine, we didn't see that happen. And you build a prison. And so the prison essentially is illegal. All this is illegal. But it's just not there. Nobody knows about it. So that's called Gitmoizing. You take a sort of a facility and you make it into a prison. And they put them in Saddam's old torture prison, which I talked about, Abu Ghraib. They also, and this became very famous, began to render them. They began to do extraordinary renditions. And there's a film about this, again with Jake Gyllenhaal, as I recall, called Rendition. And it's not a bad picture of, it's, as I said, Jake Gyllenhaal is, I think doing his best to use his star power to shine a light on these different things that America has done in the name of freedom and democracy and securing the oil supply. The CIA and other agencies in the United States, security agencies, usually intelligence agencies, begin to say, we're interested in that prisoner, these 3 prisoners. So they would take them from Abu Ghraib or wherever they were, either in Iraq or in Guantanamo, and fly them somewhere. And they would fly them somewhere on these bloody Gulfstream jets, which became sort of this nightmare. Because Gulfstream jet is a very low profile, and they come in and they can come in and out of the country. They're not officially flagged necessarily. It might have flagged in, let's say, flagged in the United States, would have the tail, would have the number. There's a number identifying each aircraft, and you have to declare when you're coming into airspace and so on. And then you put your prisoner, detainee, pardon me, into what is called a black site. And a black site is called that because nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows it's there, except for the few people basically who are running it. So the CIA knows about it. Some parts of the CIA know about it. And they say, oh yeah, we have a black site in, say, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. And there's usually quid pro quo. So you go to the European country that you would like, where you would like to keep a black site, and you say, we'd like to have this. Of course, we will help you. We are, the United States, as you know, the biggest power in the world, and we're prepared to help you achieve your goals. What do you need? And then there's horse trading ensues. And they say, okay, well, you can use this piece of unused warehousing that we have on the outskirts of suburban blah city, and you're like, fine, that's fine, and you begin to use that, and you use it as a black site, and that's where you keep your people, and you keep them shackled there for years, and nobody knows you've got them, so you just feed them and do whatever you want to them, basically. So you begin to use these flights, these Gulfstream jets, to take prisoners, detainees, elsewhere to these black sites, including prison ships. which we know that the CIA and the military was using. The problem with these prison ships is we have no idea where they were. We have, in some indications. What do they look like? Well, refurbished oil tankers, big cargo ships, and you've seen how massive those things are. So below decks, basically, you've got a big, open, empty hangar, and that's a perfect place to build some cells. And you put people in your cells. And if they get out, where are they going to go? You don't have to worry about security too much. The worst thing they're going to do is jump overboard and die. Well, you don't want that to happen. So, you go out to sea and you stay at sea. And for the duration, and you rotate your staff, of course. You're not inhuman. Let people go home. Just not the detainees. So these people who have these detainees, because they're not prisoners of war, have no rights in the law, right? That's the reason why you call them detainees, not prisoners of war. And you don't charge them with crimes. If you don't charge them with crimes, they don't have access to lawyers because they're not criminals. They're detainees, right? That means they don't have access to lawyers for years. Can they call their families? No, of course not. They just disappear. Do they have access to the Red Cross, the Red Crescent, which is the equivalent? The Red Crescent is the same as the Red Cross, except that in Arabic countries, or in Muslim, really, it's not so much Arabic countries as in Muslim countries. In Muslim countries, if you appear with a big red cross, it's like you're not necessarily from the good guys. So the Red Crescent is the International Committee of the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, is the International Committee of the Red Crescent in Muslim countries. Because the Red Crescent is a familiar and comfortable, reassuring religious symbol. Okay. But if you don't have declared prisoners of war, the Red Cross, which normally does have access to prisoners of war, wouldn't have access to these people, or the Red Crescent, because they're not prisoners of war. So for the United States, that meant that they could be treated in any way necessary to produce the kind of information about bin Laden, or later in Iraq, the deck of cards, the Ba'ath Party, which was, remember, Saddam Hussein's party that I've mentioned already, anything you want. What did that mean? It seemed to mean there were really no limits as to what you could do to these people. And we still don't really know the limits of what has happened to these folks. Some of them just disappeared forever. Presumably they were killed. They died at some point. They were tortured to death. They died in captivity because they were treated so badly. It doesn't really take a lot to kill somebody in captivity. There was a study of this in Britain about what happens when you take people and you begin to subject them to really basic stuff like, you take their clothes away and have them stand on a steel deck for 24 hours. You can die pretty fast. As far as we know, what I have read is that the people who were involved were men. I have not seen any women who were at the center of this. Now, there were women's prisons and there were women's detention camps. You can't mix male and female prisoners in a Muslim culture because there's a strict, you have to strictly separate men and women. Their spheres of activity are very different. But there are these very strong rules against nakedness, nudity. Male nudity is forbidden. Male-female nudity is forbidden. Female nudity, I don't know. Female nudity, I don't know. But it's a serious issue. So, as far as I know, all the people who were in Guantanamo, and there are still people there, are men. And the same thing was true in Abu Ghraib. I don't remember reading about a female prisoner in Abu Ghraib because it was a male-only prison. And we do the same kind of thing. We don't exactly have co-ed prisons in Canada and the United States. There are women's prisons, there are men's prisons.